Welcome to Alpha Destiny Tales, where forbidden romance, dark mysteries, and powerful Alpha Kings come to life. Tonight, I'm bringing you a story that will make your heart race and your breath catch. This is the tale of Lyra Ashworth, a young Omega marked by destiny itself, who dared to run from the most powerful Alpha King in the Northern Territories. But what happens when you try to outrun fate? When the mate bond pulls tighter than any chain? When the one man you fear the most becomes the only one who can save you? Lyra thought the ancient cliff tunnels would hide her from the blood moon mating rite. She thought the darkness would protect her from her destiny. She was wrong, because Alpha King Kale Blackthorn doesn't just find what he's hunting. He claims it. And tonight, as the crimson moon rises over Shadow Peak Kingdom, two souls bound by prophecy will collide in the most dangerous place of all, where the past whispers warnings and the future demands surrender. If you're ready for a story of destiny, danger, and a love that refuses to be denied, then hit that subscribe button and smash that like, because we're going after our first 1,000 subscribers, and we need you on this journey with us. Now, let's dive into the darkness. The blood moon hung low over Shadow Peak Kingdom, like a crimson eye, watching, waiting, judging. Lyra Ashworth stood at the edge of the ceremonial grounds, her white linen dress catching the ethereal glow of hundreds of blue flames dancing around ancient standing stones. The fabric whispered against her skin, each thread feeling like a binding she couldn't escape. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought everyone could hear it, thought the entire pack could sense her terror bleeding into the cold night air. Around her, unmated wolves gathered in concentric circles, their excited whispers creating a symphony of anticipation. This was supposed to be a sacred night, a beautiful night. The blood moon mating rite happened once every 5 years, when the moon turned red, and the ancient magic of their kind pulled destined mates together with invisible threads of fate. For most wolves, this was a dream. For Lyra, it was a nightmare wearing a ceremonial mask. She pulled her dark auburn hair forward over her left shoulder, desperately trying to hide the silver crescent moon birthmark that decorated her neck. That mark, that beautiful, terrible mark, was supposed to be hidden. Had been hidden her entire 23 years of life, because that mark meant death. It meant prophecy. It meant she was never supposed to exist in the first place. "Lyra, you're shaking," whispered Mara, her closest friend, squeezing her hand. "It's going to be okay. Maybe your mate won't even be here tonight. Maybe he's across the ocean or in the southern packs or—" "He's here," Lyra interrupted, her voice barely audible. She could feel it, a pull so strong it made her bones ache, made her wolf whine and scratch at her consciousness, begging to be released. "Mara, I can feel him. He's close. Too close." And that was the problem, wasn't it? Because Lyra knew exactly who would be drawn to her mark tonight. The prophecy had been whispered in the shadows for generations. A silver-marked Omega, born under a blood moon, destined to either save or destroy the Alpha bloodline. When she was a child, Elder Moira had pulled her aside after seeing the mark, her milky white eyes somehow seeing everything that mattered. "You will bring either salvation or annihilation," the old woman had said, her weathered hands trembling as they traced the crescent moon. "The most powerful Alpha will be drawn to you, and your union will break ancient chains or forge new ones in blood." Lyra had spent every day since then living in fear, hiding in the Omega Quarter, working in the gardens, making herself invisible. But tonight, there was nowhere to hide. The rite demanded the presence of every unmated wolf between 18 and 30. Refusal meant exile or death. So here she stood, a lamb walking into a den of wolves, waiting for the inevitable. The drumming began. Deep, resonant, primal, it echoed through the stone circle, through the ground, through her very soul. The unmated males began to gather on one side of the ceremony ground, their eyes scanning, searching, bodies tense with anticipation. And then the crowd parted. The whispers died. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Alpha King Kale Blackthorn entered the ceremonial grounds like darkness given form. He wore black leather that seemed to absorb light, his chest partially bare beneath an open vest, that revealed tribal tattoos snaking across his left arm and shoulder. His jet-black hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd just shifted from wolf form, and fell across his forehead in a way that made him look both regal and wild. But it was his eyes that made Lyra's blood run cold and hot simultaneously. Golden amber eyes that glowed in the firelight, eyes that held power and danger, and something that looked almost like pain. He was beautiful, terrifying, perfect. Everything the prophecy had promised. Chaol Blackthorn, the king of the Northern Territories, the most powerful alpha in 3 kingdoms, unmated at 29 because he'd killed the last woman who'd tried to force a bond with poison and lies. He stood 6 feet 4 inches of pure dominance, and as his gaze swept across the gathering, every wolf there lowered their eyes in submission. Every wolf except Lyra, who was frozen in place, unable to look away, unable to breathe. Their eyes met across the ceremonial ground. The world stopped. The bond snapped into place like a chain wrapping around her soul, burning silver hot through every nerve in her body. His golden eyes widened, then blazed with something primal and possessive. Recognition. Hunger. Inevitability. "No," Lyra whispered. "No, no, no." The Alpha King took a step forward, his entire body oriented toward her like a predator who'd just spotted prey. The crowd began to murmur, to realize what was happening. The king had found his mate. But before the ceremony could proceed, before the elder could step forward to bind them with ancient words and ritual, Lyra made a choice that would change everything. She ran. It was instinct, pure and desperate. One moment she was standing there, trapped by golden eyes and a fate she couldn't accept. And the next she was spinning on her heel and sprinting toward the edge of the ceremonial grounds. Gasps erupted behind her. Someone shouted her name, but she didn't stop. Didn't look back. Just gathered her white dress in her fists and ran like her life depended on it. Because it did. "Caesar!" The Alpha King's voice cut through the night like a blade, deep and commanding and absolutely furious. The authority in his voice made every wolf in the vicinity stop moving, made them want to obey. But Lyra was already beyond the stone circle, already crashing into the tree line, her bare feet hitting the forest floor with desperate speed. She knew these woods, had explored them as a child, had memorized every path when she'd planned for this exact moment, because some part of her had always known this night would come, that the prophecy would demand its price. So she'd prepared. She'd found the one place no one would follow, the one place even an Alpha King might hesitate to enter. The Forbidden Cliff tunnels. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of thick vegetation, marked by ancient warnings carved into stone. The tunnels were legendary in Shadow Peak, whispered about in cautionary tales. Centuries ago, they'd been used by wolves fleeing war. But something had happened inside. Some said rejected mates had gone mad in the darkness, and their spirits still wandered the passages. Others claimed the tunnels were cursed by a witch who'd lost her children to the Alpha bloodline. Whatever the truth, the tunnels were forbidden territory. No one entered them. No one survived them. Lyra didn't care. She crashed through the vegetation, thorns tearing at her dress and skin, and found the narrow opening in the cliff face. Behind her, she could hear shouting, the sounds of pursuit. The mate bond pulled at her like hooks in her chest, making her wolf howl in protest, begging her to turn back, to submit, to accept. But her human mind was stronger, driven by fear and the memory of prophecy. She squeezed through the opening, the stone scraping her shoulders, and stumbled into darkness so complete it swallowed her whole. The temperature dropped immediately, the air tasting of earth and old stone and something else, something ancient and watching. Her breathing echoed off unseen walls. The sounds of pursuit faded as she moved deeper, her hands stretched out before her, following the wall by touch alone. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. In the absolute darkness, time lost meaning. Her bare feet found sharp rocks that cut her soles, found puddles of ice-cold water that soaked her dress. Roots from trees above broke through the ceiling, forcing her to duck and weave. But she kept moving, driven by terror and determination in equal measure. And then, gradually, light began to seep into the tunnel. Not firelight or moonlight, but something else entirely. a soft, pale blue glow emanating from crystals growing from the walls and ceiling. Bioluminescent minerals that had been growing in the darkness for centuries, creating an otherworldly illumination that made the tunnel look like the inside of a frozen star. It was beautiful and eerie, and as Lyra paused to catch her breath, she realized she could see ancient carvings on the walls. Wolves, dozens of them, carved by hands long dead, and words in the old language, warnings she couldn't fully read but understood in her bones. Turn back. Death walks these paths. The bond cannot be broken. Haunting, isn't it? The voice came from behind her, deep and smooth and absolutely terrifying, because it meant he'd followed her into the forbidden dark. The ancient wolves carved their truths in stone, hoping future generations would heed their wisdom. But here you are, running from fate like you can actually escape it. Lyra spun around, her back hitting the tunnel wall. Alpha King, Cale Blackthorn, stood 20 feet away, backlit by the blue crystal light, his cloak abandoned, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled breathing. His golden eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the crystal light like a predator's eyes caught in flame. He'd removed his crown, and his black hair was wild now, making him look less like a king and more like the wolf he was. "Stay away from me," Lyra managed, her voice shaking but defiant. "You don't understand." "The prophecy?" "I know the prophecy," he interrupted, taking a step closer. His voice was calmer now, but no less dangerous. "A silver-marked Omega, born under the blood moon, destined to either save or destroy the Alpha bloodline. Elder Moira told me about it years ago when I took the throne. She said I would know my true mate by the mark on her neck, and that our union would break the curse that's plagued my family for 6 generations. Lyra's hand flew to her neck, covering the mark that had betrayed her. "It also says I could destroy you, that our union could mean the end of everything. How can you chase someone who might kill you? How can you run from someone who's meant to save you?" He countered, taking another step. The tunnel seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in. "Do you feel it, Lyra? The bond pulling at your chest, demanding you submit, demanding you come to me? That's not a curse. That's destiny recognizing what we're too afraid to accept." "You don't know anything about me," she said, but her voice cracked, because he was right. The bond was there, undeniable. A silver thread connecting them that grew tighter with every passing second. Her wolf was going insane, throwing itself against her mental walls, desperate to be released, desperate to run to him instead of away. "I know you're terrified," Cale said, his voice softening just a fraction. "I know you've spent your entire life hiding, making yourself small, pretending you're nothing special. But that mark on your neck, it chose you for a reason. The prophecy speaks of you for a reason. And this bond between us, it exists for a reason." He took another step, and another, closing the distance between them with predatory patience. Lyra could see him clearly now in the crystal light, could see the jagged scar cutting through his right eyebrow and down his cheek, a mark of violence from his past. Could see the tribal tattoos that covered his left arm and part of his chest, symbols of his lineage and power. Could see the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands flexed at his sides like he was fighting every instinct to grab her and never let go. "I'm not afraid of the prophecy, Lyra," he continued, now only 10 feet away. "I'm not afraid of you destroying me. Do you know what I'm afraid of? Losing you before I ever really have you. Watching you run into darkness and danger because you're too scared to trust what fate has given us. That terrifies me more than any curse." "You don't even know me," Lyra repeated, but it sounded weak even to her own ears. "How can you care about someone you just met?" "I've been waiting for you my entire life," Cale said simply. "Every mate bond I've ever witnessed. I wondered when mine would snap into place. Every woman who threw themselves at me for power or status, I turned away because they weren't you. And the moment I saw you tonight, standing there in your white dress trying so hard to be invisible, trying so desperately to hide that beautiful mark on your neck, my wolf recognized you. My soul recognized you. This isn't about time, Lyra. This is about truth." He was so close now. 5 feet. close enough that she could see the way his chest moved with each breath, could smell the scent of pine and smoke, and something uniquely him that made her wolf purr in contentment. Close enough that if she reached out, she could touch the tattoos on his arm, trace the marks that told his story. "Why did you come into these tunnels?" Lyra asked desperately, trying to find some argument, some reason to keep the fear alive. "These tunnels are forbidden. Even you shouldn't be here." "The curse. There is no curse on these tunnels," Kale said, surprising her. "That's a story we let people believe to keep them away from this place. The truth is, these tunnels hold the tombs of the original Alpha bloodline, my ancestors, and there's something here I need to show you, something that will make you understand why the prophecy exists and why we're meant to be together." Before Lyra could respond, before she could process his words, a sound echoed through the tunnel, a deep, resonant growl that came from somewhere in the darkness beyond the crystal light. Both of them froze. That wasn't a wolf's growl. That was something else entirely, something old and angry and very much awake. "What was that?" Lyra whispered, genuine terror replacing her fear of the Alpha King. Kale's entire demeanor changed. His eyes blazed golden, his body shifting into a protective stance in front of her despite the fact that she'd been running from him. "Guardian spirits," he said, his voice tight. "The ancient wolves who guard the tombs. They're not supposed to wake unless—" He trailed off, his eyes widening slightly. "Unless they sense the silver mark. Unless they sense the one who can break the curse." The growling grew louder, echoing from multiple directions now. Shadows moved in the darkness beyond the blue crystal light, shapes that were too large, too wrong to be natural wolves. And then Lyra saw them. Spectral wolves, their forms translucent and glowing with a sickly gray light, their eyes empty voids, their teeth bared in eternal rage. There were dozens of them, emerging from side passages surrounding them. "Kale?" Lyra breathed, all her earlier defiance forgotten in the face of this new threat. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice dropping into pure alpha authority. The air around him seemed to shimmer as his power rose, as he prepared to shift, to fight. "No matter what happens, stay close." But Lyra was frozen, staring at the spirits, because carved into the tunnel walls behind them, she could see more words, more warnings. And these she could read, written in common tongue by someone who'd wanted their message understood. The curse will only break when the silver-marked one accepts her true mate before the blood moon sets. If she denies him, the curse will claim them both. Her blood turned to ice. The blood moon, the ceremony. She'd run during the one night when the bond needed to be accepted, when the ancient magic was at its strongest. And now, the guardian spirits were awake, enforcing a curse she'd never truly understood. "Kale," she said urgently, grabbing his arm. The moment she touched him, electricity sparked between them, the mate bond singing with approval. "The curse. We have until moonset to—" "I know," he said grimly, his eyes never leaving the advancing spirits. "I've always known. That's why I came for you immediately. That's why I couldn't let you run. We have less than 3 hours, Lyra. 3 hours to accept this bond or we both die." The spirits attacked. They moved like smoke given form, lunging at them with ghostly fangs and claws. Kale shifted in an explosion of power, his wolf form massive and midnight black, his golden eyes blazing in the darkness. He met the first spirit head-on, his jaws snapping through its translucent form. The spirit screamed, a sound that wasn't quite animal and wasn't quite human, before dissipating into mist. But there were too many. For every spirit Kale destroyed, 2 more appeared. They were losing ground, being driven deeper into the tunnels toward a massive chamber that glowed with more of the blue crystals. Lyra ran beside him, her own wolf begging to be released, but she was too weak, too untrained to shift during a fight. She'd spent her life hiding, not learning to battle. They burst into the chamber, and Lyra gasped. This wasn't just a cave. This was a tomb. An ancient hall carved with intricate designs and filled with stone sarcophagi. Each tomb bore the name of an Alpha King from generations past, their stories carved in stone. And at the center of the chamber stood a massive altar, and on that altar lay a sword, its blade still gleaming after centuries. The spirits flooded into the chamber but stopped at its threshold, as if held back by invisible barriers. They circled the entrance, growling and snapping, but came no closer. Kyle shifted back to human form, his body slick with sweat, and glowing faintly with the exertion of power. He was breathing hard, his golden eyes wild, but he immediately moved to Lyra, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her arms, her shoulders, surprisingly gentle despite the violence they'd just survived. "I'm fine," Lyra managed, though she was shaking. "Kyle, what is this place? What's happening?" "This is the tomb of my ancestors," he said, looking around the chamber with something that might have been reverence. "And that," he pointed to the sword on the altar, "is Nightfall, the blade that was forged when the curse began. 6 generations ago, my ancestor Alpha King Marius Blackthorn betrayed his true mate. She was a silver-marked Omega like you, and the prophecy told him their union would either save or destroy his bloodline. He was afraid, just like you're afraid now, so he rejected her, chose another for political power, and she, heartbroken and betrayed, used the last of her life force to curse his bloodline, until a silver-marked Omega accepts her true Alpha King under the blood moon," she said. "Every generation will lose their mate to madness or death. The bloodline will weaken until nothing remains but dust and memory." Lyra stared at him, the pieces falling into place. "That's why you're unmated at 29. That's why every Alpha King in your line has suffered tragedy. The curse has been killing your family. For 6 generations, Kale confirmed, his voice heavy. "My father watched my mother descend into madness. My grandfather's mate died in childbirth. On and on, tragedy after tragedy, until Elder Moira told me about you, about the prophecy, that the curse could finally be broken if I found my true silver-marked mate, and if she accepted me willingly, before the blood moon set." He turned to face her fully, and in the blue crystal light, he looked less like a terrifying Alpha King, and more like a man who'd carried the weight of 6 generations on his shoulders. "I'm not trying to force you into this bond, Lyra. I know you're afraid. I know the prophecy speaks of destruction as well as salvation, but I'm asking you to trust me, to trust us, because I've seen what the curse does, and I refuse to let it claim another generation. I refuse to let it claim you." Lyra looked at the sword on the altar, at the tombs surrounding them, at the spirits still circling beyond the chamber's protection, and she felt it, the truth settling into her bones. She hadn't been running from Kale. She'd been running from herself, from the responsibility the mark represented, from the power she'd been taught to hide. But hiding hadn't saved her. It had brought her here, to this moment, to this choice. "What do I have to do?" she asked quietly. Kale's eyes widened, hope flaring in their golden depths. "Accept the bond. Speak the words of acceptance. Let the mate mark appear on your skin. And then," he gestured to the sword, "we complete the ritual. We take up Nightfall together, bonded as true mates, and we break the curse that's haunted my bloodline." "And if I do this," Lyra said, her hand unconsciously moving to the silver mark on her neck, "if I accept you, accept this destiny, what happens to the prophecy? What if I still destroy you?" Kyle stepped closer, so close now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her cheek with surprising gentleness. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and his touch was warm, solid, real. "Then we face that together," he said simply. "I'd rather be destroyed standing beside my true mate than live another day running from destiny. I'd rather burn in fire with you than freeze alone in darkness. The prophecy speaks of salvation or destruction, Lyra, but I believe, I have to believe, that our choice matters, that love can tip the scales." Lyra's breath caught. Love. He was talking about love when they'd known each other less than an hour. But wasn't that what the mate bond was? Instant, all-consuming, impossible to deny. She could feel it between them. that silver thread pulling tighter, demanding acknowledgement, demanding surrender. "I accept," she whispered, the words falling from her lips like a vow. "I accept the mate bond. I accept you, Cale Blackthorn, as my true mate." The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Silver light exploded from her neck mark, from the crescent moon that had marked her since birth. The light spread like liquid fire across her skin, creating patterns, creating the traditional mate marks that would bind them forever. Kyle gasped, his own skin erupting with matching silver marks that traced the tribal tattoos on his arm and chest, connecting them, claiming them, sealing them together. The mate bond snapped into place completely, no longer fighting, no longer resisted, and with it came emotion. His emotions. She could feel his relief, his joy, his overwhelming protective instinct, his desire, and underneath it all, something deeper. Something that might have been love or might become love, something that was wholly theirs. Cale pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, and for the first time since the night began, Lyra felt safe. She felt found. His scent surrounded her, his warmth seeped into her bones, and her wolf finally stopped fighting, stopped panicking, and simply settled into the contentment of being exactly where she belonged. "Together," Cale murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Now and always, we face everything together." The chamber suddenly flooded with light, brighter than the crystals, brighter than the moon. The sword on the altar began to glow, calling to them. Kyle took Lyra's hand, their fingers interlacing perfectly, and together they approached the altar. The spirits outside the chamber had gone silent, watching, waiting. They reached for nightfall together, their hands wrapping around the hilt simultaneously. The moment they touched it, the sword flared with blinding silver light, and Lyra felt power surge through her like nothing she'd ever experienced. Not just Cale's power, not just her own, but something combined, something multiplied, something absolutely unstoppable. The curse shattered. She could feel it breaking, could hear the sound like glass splintering across dimensions. The spirits beyond the chamber began to dissolve, their eternal guard duty finally complete. The tombs around them glowed briefly, as if the ancient Alpha Kings were acknowledging what had happened, as if they were finally at peace, and then it was over. The light faded. The sword became just a sword, but the mate marks on their skin remained, silver and beautiful, proof of what they'd accomplished. Cale turned to her, and in his eyes she saw wonder and relief, and something else, something that made her heart skip. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You broke a 6th-generation curse. You saved my bloodline. You saved me. We did it," Lyra corrected, squeezing his hand. "Together, just like you said." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less burdened. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming, possessive, filled with all the emotion they'd both been fighting. And Lyra kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his black hair, her body molding against his, accepting everything the mate bond offered. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cale rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably take you back to the castle," he murmured. "There's a ceremony to complete, a kingdom to inform that their king has found his queen. But honestly, I'm tempted to stay here in this tomb a little longer, just the two of us before we have to face the world." Lyra laughed, the sound surprising her. Actual laughter. When hours ago she'd been running in terror. "We have our whole lives for moments alone," she said, "but your people are probably worried, and mine are probably terrified. We should go back, complete the ceremony properly, show them the curse is broken. Our people," Cale corrected gently. "They're our people now. You're their queen, Lyra. Whether you're ready for that or not." The weight of that truth settled on her shoulders, but it didn't feel crushing. Not with Cale beside her, not with the mate bond humming between them, not with the knowledge that she'd already faced her greatest fear and survived. "Then let's go home," she said. Together. They walked back through the tunnels hand in hand, the blue crystals lighting their way, the spirits gone, the danger past, And when they emerged from the forbidden cliff tunnels into the pre-dawn light, the blood moon finally setting on the horizon, they were met by a crowd of wolves who'd been waiting all night. Beta Marcus Stone stood at the front, relief clear on his usually stoic face. Elder Moira was there too, her milky white eyes somehow finding Lyra in the crowd, a knowing smile on her weathered face. "The curse is broken," Cale announced, his voice carrying through the crowd with alpha authority. "The prophecy is fulfilled. Lyra Ashworth, marked by destiny, has accepted the mate bond. She is my queen, your queen, and together we will lead this kingdom into a new era." The crowd erupted in cheers and howls, the sound echoing through the forest. But Lyra only had eyes for Cale, for her mate, for the man who'd chased her into darkness and brought her back into light. She'd been so afraid of the prophecy, so terrified of destiny, but standing here now, marked and mated and found, she understood something fundamental. Destiny couldn't be outrun, but it could be embraced. And sometimes, the thing you fear most becomes the thing that saves you. As the sun began to rise over Shadow Peak Kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Alpha King Cale Blackthorn and his silver-marked queen returned to Blackthorn Castle to complete their mating ceremony, to bind their lives together in front of their pack, and to begin writing a new chapter in a story that had been 6 generations in the making. The prophecy had spoken of salvation or destruction. In the end, they'd chosen salvation, together. But as Lyra would soon discover, breaking one curse only opened the door to new challenges. Because being queen wasn't just about wearing a crown and standing beside an Alpha King. It was about proving herself to a kingdom that had never seen an Omega rise to power, about facing enemies who saw her mark not as salvation, but as a threat, and about discovering that the silver crescent moon on her neck held secrets even the prophecy hadn't revealed. The mating ceremony was held 3 days later in the Great Hall of Blackthorn Castle. The massive stone chamber was packed with wolves from every corner of the Northern Territories, all gathered to witness their king finally claim his queen. Lyra stood before an ancient mirror in the queen's chambers, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Gone was the simple white ceremonial dress, torn and dirtied from her flight through the tunnels. In its place was a gown of deep midnight blue, the color of the night sky just before dawn, with silver embroidery that matched the mate marks now permanently etched into her skin. The dress hugged her slender frame before flowing to the floor in layers of silk that whispered with every movement. Her dark auburn hair had been woven into an intricate braid, crowned with small crystals that caught the light, and around her neck, instead of her mother's simple leather cord, hung a silver chain bearing the Blackthorn crest. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. "You're trembling," Elder Moira said from behind her, the old woman's weathered hands coming to rest on Lyra's shoulders. Despite her milky white eyes, the elder seemed to see everything that mattered. "The mark on your neck brought you here, child. But it's what's in your heart that will keep you here. Do you love him?" Lyra's hand instinctively moved to the silver marks on her collarbone, the ones that connected her to Cale, that let her feel his emotions even now, as he waited in the great hall. She could sense his anticipation, his pride, and underneath it all, a thread of concern for her. "I barely know him," she whispered. 3 days ago, I was running from him in terror. How can I claim to love someone I've known for less than a week? "The mate bond doesn't ask permission," Moira said simply. "It doesn't wait for you to be ready, or for circumstances to be perfect. It simply is. But love is a choice you make every day, in every moment, in every challenge you face together. So I ask you again, Lyra Ashworth, soon to be Blackthorn, do you love him?" Lyra closed her eyes, reaching for that silver thread that connected her to Cale, feeling the warmth of it, the strength, the absolute certainty that he would protect her with his last breath. And she felt her own emotions reflected back, the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, the way she felt safe in his arms, the way she wanted to know everything about him, wanted to stand beside him not just as his mate, but as his partner. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I love him. I don't understand it, and it terrifies me. But yes, then that's all you need," Moira said, squeezing her shoulders. The rest is just details. The ceremony was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Lyra walked down the center aisle of the great hall, her bare feet silent on the ancient stone floor, as tradition dictated the new queen must approach her king as she had been born, without artifice or pretense. The hall fell silent as she passed, hundreds of golden eyes tracking her movement, assessing, judging. She could feel their skepticism, their doubt. An Omega Queen had never ruled in the Northern Territories. Many saw her as weak, as unworthy, as a novelty that would fade once the mate bond's initial intensity wore off. But then she reached the dais where Chaol waited, and nothing else mattered. He stood before his throne dressed in ceremonial black, his crown resting on his dark hair, his golden eyes blazing as they locked onto hers. The mate bond thrummed between them, and she could feel his wolf rising to meet hers, could feel his absolute conviction that she belonged exactly where she was. Lyra Ashworth, Chaol's voice carried through the hall, deep and resonant with alpha authority. Do you accept the responsibilities of queen? Do you vow to stand beside me, to lead our people with wisdom and strength, to protect this kingdom with your life? I do, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Do you accept me as your mate, your partner, your equal in all things? Not because prophecy demands it, not because fate has bound us, but because you choose it freely? The question caught her off guard. This wasn't part of the traditional ceremony. This was Chaol, giving her one final chance to walk away, to refuse, to run. Even now, even here, he was offering her a choice. Her eyes stung with unexpected tears as she understood what he was doing, what he was offering. I choose you, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hall. I choose this bond. I choose to stand beside you, not behind you. I choose love over fear, trust over doubt. I choose you, Chaol Blackthorn. Today, and every day after. Something shifted in Chaol's expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen before, as if her words had touched something deep inside him. He reached for her hands, and when their fingers intertwined, silver light pulsed from their mate marks, visible to everyone in the hall. Then, before our people, before our ancestors, before the ancient magic that binds us all, I name you Lyra Blackthorn, Queen of the Northern Territories, protector of Shadow Peak, and the mate of my soul. He pulled her close and kissed her, and the great hall erupted in howls and cheers. The ceremony was complete. The Omega girl who'd hidden in gardens was now a queen. But not everyone was celebrating. From the corner of her eye, Lyra caught sight of Sienna Vale standing near the back of the hall, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her ice blue eyes filled with cold fury. The high-ranking wolf who'd expected to be chosen as queen wore a dress of deep red that screamed defiance, and the look she gave Lyra promised that this battle was far from over. The celebration feast lasted until dawn, the castle filled with music and laughter, and the sounds of a kingdom rejoicing. But Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that beneath the joy and acceptance, danger lurked. She stood on the balcony of the Queen's chambers, looking out over the forest that surrounded Blackthorn Castle, when Chaol found her. Hiding from your own celebration? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. The mate bond hummed with contentment at his nearness, and Lyra leaned back into his warmth. Not hiding, she said. Just thinking. Chaol, what does this mark really mean? The prophecy spoke of breaking the curse, and we did that. But Elder Moira said something earlier about the mark holding secrets. What aren't you telling me? She felt Chaol tense, felt his reluctance through the bond. The silver mark isn't just a symbol, he said finally. It's a source of power. The original silver-marked Omega, the one my ancestor betrayed, she wasn't just any wolf. She was a moon priestess, a wolf who could channel the magic of the moon itself. When she cursed my bloodline, she also prophesied that another would come bearing the same mark, carrying the same potential power. You, Lyra. Lyra spun in his arms, staring up at him with wide eyes. Power? What kind of power? I can't even shift properly during a fight. I'm the weakest wolf in the pack. You're not weak. Kale said fiercely, his hands coming up to cup her face. You've been suppressed, hidden, taught to make yourself small, but that mark chose you for a reason. The Moon Priestess bloodline skips generations, appearing only when it's needed most. And I know, that it's awakening in you. I've seen it. The way the spirits in the tunnel responded to you, the way the sword glowed brighter when you touched it, the way your mate marks shine silver instead of the traditional gold. You're more than you know, Lyra. More than anyone knows, and that's going to make some people very nervous. Like Sienna Vale, Lyra said, understanding dawning. She wasn't just angry about losing you. She's afraid of what I represent. Sienna comes from the old families, the ones who've held power in the Northern Territories for centuries, Kyle explained. They're not happy about change, about an Omega rising to power, about ancient magic awakening. They'll smile to your face and plot behind your back. That's why I need you to start training, to learn how to access the power your mark holds. Because I won't always be able to protect you, and you need to be able to protect yourself. The next morning, Lyra's training began. Beta Marcus Stone met her in the castle's private training grounds as the sun rose, his steel-gray eyes assessing her with the same skepticism she'd seen in the Great Hall. Your Majesty, he said, the title sounding foreign and slightly mocking on his lips. The king has asked me to train you in combat. I'll be honest, I don't see the point. An Omega learning to fight is like teaching a rabbit to hunt wolves. But orders are orders. Then let's get started, Lyra said, keeping her voice steady despite the insult. She'd changed into simple training clothes, dark pants and a fitted tunic that allowed movement, and stood in the center of the sandy training circle, waiting. Marcus moved faster than she expected, a blur of motion that had him behind her in seconds, his arm locked around her throat in a chokehold. Dead, he said flatly. In a real fight, you wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds. How exactly do you plan to be queen if you can't even defend yourself? Lyra struggled against his grip, her wolf rising in fury at the humiliation, at being handled so easily. And then something happened. The silver mark on her neck began to burn, not painfully, but with an intensity that made her gasp. Silver light exploded from her skin, and Marcus was thrown backward, his body hitting the sand 10 feet away with bone-jarring force. Silence. Marcus stared at her with wide eyes, shock written across his usually stoic features. Lyra stared at her hands, which were glowing with the same silver light that had thrown him. I don't know how Again, Marcus said, climbing to his feet, and this time there was respect in his voice. Do it again. Show me what you can do. They trained for hours, and slowly, painfully, Lyra began to understand. The mark wasn't just a symbol. It was a conduit for ancient magic, power that responded to her emotions, to her need to protect, to her wolf's instinct to fight back. When Marcus attacked, she could create barriers of silver light that stopped him. When he circled her, she could sense his movement before he made it, as if the moon itself was showing her the path. And when she finally managed to land a hit, channeling power through her fist, she sent the beta crashing into the training grounds wall. Not bad for a rabbit, Marcus said with the ghost of a smile, rubbing his bruised jaw. The king was right. You're more than you appear. But power without control is dangerous, Your Majesty. You need to learn restraint, precision. Otherwise, you're as likely to hurt allies as enemies. Over the following weeks, Lyra's life became a careful balance between learning to be queen and learning to control her emerging powers. Kale taught her about politics, about the delicate alliances that kept the Northern Territories stable, about the constant threat of the Southern Pax, who saw their kingdom as weak. Marcus taught her combat, pushing her harder every day until she could fight without relying solely on her silver magic. And Elder Moira taught her about the Moon Priestess lineage, about ancient rituals and forgotten magic that had once been commonplace among their kind. But through it all, the threat Sienna represented grew more tangible. The high-ranking wolf had gathered supporters among the old families. Wolves who whispered that an Omega Queen was unnatural, that the prophecy had been fulfilled, and Lyra was no longer needed. Twice, Lyra found her food had been poisoned with wolfsbane, not enough to kill, but enough to weaken. 3 times, accidents happened during her training that would have been fatal if not for her emerging powers. And always, she felt ice-blue eyes watching her from the shadows. "She's planning something," Lyra told Cale one night as they lay in their shared chambers, his arms wrapped protectively around her. The mate bond had deepened over the weeks, and now she could feel not just his emotions, but his thoughts, his dreams, his absolute devotion to her. Sienna isn't going to stop with small attacks. She's building towards something bigger. "I know," Cale said grimly, his fingers tracing the silver marks on her shoulder. "I've had Marcus watching her. She's been meeting with wolves from the Eastern Territories, wolves who've never sworn allegiance to me. I think she's planning a challenge." "A challenge?" Lyra's blood ran cold. A formal challenge meant a fight to the death, the old way of determining leadership among wolf packs. "She can't challenge you. You're the Alpha King. No one is strong enough to—" "She won't challenge me," Kyle interrupted. "She'll challenge you, for the right to be queen, and according to pack law, I can't fight in your place. You'll have to face her alone." Lyra's heart hammered in her chest. Sienna was a trained warrior, a wolf who'd been fighting since she could walk. Even with her emerging powers, even with weeks of training, Lyra knew she wasn't ready to face someone like that in a death match. "When?" she whispered. "Full moon," Cale said. 3 days from now. Marcus intercepted a message. She's going to issue the challenge in front of the entire kingdom during the moon ceremony. Very public, very official. If you refuse, you'll be seen as weak, unworthy. If you accept, he didn't finish, but he didn't need to. They both knew the stakes. "Then I accept," Lyra said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I won't let her intimidate me out of my position. I won't let her undo everything we've accomplished. And I won't hide anymore, Kyle. I've spent my entire life hiding. The mark chose me. The prophecy spoke of me. It's time I started believing that meant something." Cale pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. Through the bond, she could feel his fear for her, his pride in her courage, his desperate wish that he could face this threat instead of her. "You're the strongest person I know," he murmured. "Not because of your power, Lyra, but because of your heart. Because you keep choosing to stand when everything in you wants to run. That's what makes you queen. Not the mark, not the prophecy. You." The 3 days passed in a blur of intensive training. Marcus worked her harder than ever, teaching her to fight dirty, to use her smaller size as an advantage, to channel her power in precise strikes rather than wild explosions. Elder Moira taught her ancient words of power, moon priestess invocations that could amplify her magic, and Cale simply held her at night, whispering promises that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The night of the full moon arrived cold and clear, the silver orb hanging huge in the sky above the ceremonial grounds. The entire kingdom had gathered, thousands of wolves in both human and wolf form, creating a sea of bodies around the ancient stone circle. Lyra stood beside Cale on the raised platform, wearing a simple white dress similar to the one she'd worn the night she fled. But this time, she wore it by choice, a symbol that she wasn't hiding anymore. "Alpha King," Sienna's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. She stepped into the center of the stone circle, dressed in fighting leathers dyed blood red, her platinum hair bound back in a warrior's braid. "I, Sienna Vale of the Highland Pack, invoke my right to challenge for the position of queen. I challenge Lyra Ashworth, the Omega who wears a crown she hasn't earned, to prove her worth in ritual combat. Does she accept, or does she run again?" The crowd erupted in whispers and growls. Every eye turned to Lyra, waiting, judging. She could feel Cale tense beside her, feel his wolf demanding he intervene, protect, destroy the threat to his mate. But pack law was sacred. This was her fight. Lyra stepped down from the platform, her bare feet finding the cold stone of the ceremonial circle. The mark on her neck began to glow softly, responding to the full moon's power. "I accept your challenge, Sienna Vale," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the crowd. "Not because I need to prove myself to you, but because I will not let threats to my pack go unanswered. You want to know if I've earned this crown? Let's find out." And the circle was drawn in salt and silver, the ancient boundaries that would contain their fight. No one could interfere once the ritual began. Life or death, the challenge would end when one of them couldn't continue. Elder Moira stood at the circle's edge, her blind eyes somehow tracking both fighters, and raised her hands. By the light of the full moon, by the ancient laws of our kind, let the challenge begin. The moon herself will judge who is worthy. Sienna shifted immediately, her wolf form massive and sleek, all white fur and ice-blue eyes. She was beautiful and deadly, a warrior born and bred. She circled Lyra with predatory patience, looking for weakness, for fear. "You should have stayed in your garden, little Omega," she snarled, her voice distorted by her wolf form. "Playing at queen doesn't make you one. And when I kill you, the king will finally see that prophecy or no prophecy, and Omega has no place on the throne." Lyra didn't shift. Instead, she called on the power the mark granted her, letting silver light flow across her skin like liquid moonlight. The crowd gasped. This wasn't normal wolf magic. This was something ancient, something they hadn't seen in generations. "You're right that I'm not like other queens," Lyra said, her voice steady. "I didn't grow up learning to fight and lead. I grew up learning to survive, to hide, to protect myself when no one else would. But you know what that taught me, Sienna? It taught me that strength isn't about size or training. It's about refusing to give up, even when everything seems impossible." Sienna lunged, all teeth and claws and rage. But Lyra was ready. She'd spent weeks training for this moment, weeks learning to channel her power with precision. She raised her hand, and a barrier of silver light erupted between them, stopping Sienna's charge cold. The white wolf crashed into it and fell back, stunned. "The Moon Priestess power," Elder Moira's voice carried across the circle, explaining to the confused crowd. "The ancient magic that once protected our kind has awakened in our queen. Watch and witness what was thought lost." Sienna recovered quickly, circling again, but now there was wariness in her eyes. This wasn't the easy kill she'd expected. She feinted left, then struck right, trying to get past Lyra's defenses. But Lyra had learned from Marcus's training. She moved with her smaller size, ducking under the attack and channeling power through her palm in a focused strike that caught Sienna's shoulder. Silver light flared, and the white wolf yelped in pain, a burn mark searing across her fur. The fight continued, brutal and desperate. Sienna was faster, stronger, more experienced, but Lyra had something the other wolf didn't. She had motivation beyond pride. She was fighting for her place, yes, but more than that. She was fighting for the kingdom that had come to depend on her, for the wolves who'd started to believe in her, for Kale who'd given her the chance to be more than she'd ever imagined. And she was fighting for herself, for the girl who'd hidden in fear her entire life and had finally found the courage to stand in the light. Sienna landed a hit, her claws raking across Lyra's arm, drawing blood. Pain exploded through her, and for a moment, the silver light faltered. The crowd roared, sensing the tide turning. Sienna pressed her advantage, driving Lyra back toward the edge of the circle, jaws snapping inches from her throat. "Submit," Sienna snarled. "Yield and I'll let you live. You can go back to your gardens where you belong." Lyra's blood ran hot with fury. Every insult, every moment of doubt, every time someone had told her she was weak or worthless or wrong, it all came flooding back. And with it came power. The silver mark on her neck blazed with light so bright, it turned night into day. "I will never submit to you," Lyra said, her voice resonating with ancient authority. "Not now, not ever. I am Lyra Blackthorn, Queen of the Northern Territories, bearer of the Moon Priestess mark, and mate to the Alpha King. And you will recognize my strength, or you will leave this circle in defeat." She thrust both hands forward and silver light exploded from her in a wave of pure power. It caught Sienna mid-lunge, lifting the massive wolf off her feet and slamming her into the edge of the sacred circle. The white wolf hit the ground hard and didn't get up, her body shifting back to human form, unconscious and bleeding but alive. Silence descended on the ceremonial grounds. Every wolf there stared at Lyra, at the silver light still dancing across her skin, at the power she'd just displayed. And then, slowly, one by one, they began to howl, not in challenge, but in acceptance. In recognition, the Omega who'd hidden in gardens had just defeated a trained warrior using power not seen in 6 generations. She'd earned her crown in the most ancient way possible. Elder Moira stepped into the circle, her weathered hands raised. "The moon has judged," she declared. "The challenge is answered. Lyra Blackthorn stands as our queen, proven in combat, blessed by ancient magic. Let any who doubt her worth speak now or forever hold their peace." No one spoke. The howls continued, growing louder, more celebratory. Even the old families who'd supported Sienna couldn't deny what they'd witnessed. Kyle vaulted into the circle, pulling Lyra into his arms, and she collapsed against him, exhaustion and relief flooding through her. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "My queen, my warrior, my everything." But even as Lyra relaxed into his embrace, even as the kingdom celebrated her victory, a new danger approached from beyond their borders, because word of the silver-marked queen had spread beyond the northern territories, and not everyone saw her power as a blessing. Some saw it as a threat that needed to be eliminated before it grew stronger. In the southern kingdoms, a council of Alpha Kings met in secret, their faces grim as they discussed the prophecy, the power, the change that was coming, whether they wanted it or not. And they made a decision that would change everything. Lyra Blackthorn's greatest challenge wasn't behind her. It was only beginning. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. She had a mate who would burn the world for her, a kingdom learning to believe in her, and a power that was only beginning to awaken. And she'd learned something crucial in these past weeks. She'd learned that destiny could be shaped, that prophecy could be fulfilled in unexpected ways, and that love, real love, made you stronger than you ever thought possible. The story of the silver-marked queen was just beginning, and this time, she wasn't running. She was ready to fight. But that fight would come sooner than anyone expected. 3 days after her victory over Sienna, as Lyra stood on the castle battlements watching the sunrise, a horn sounded from the southern watchtower. The alarm that meant only one thing: invasion. The southern kingdoms had come, and they'd brought an army. The real test of Lyra's power, and her ability to lead, was about to begin. The war horns echoed across Shadow Peak Kingdom, their mournful sound cutting through the early morning mist. Lyra stood on the battlements of Blackthorn Castle, her hands gripping the cold stone as she watched the southern horizon. Even from this distance, she could see them, an army of wolves spreading across the valley like a dark stain, their numbers in the thousands. This wasn't a raid or a skirmish. This was a full-scale invasion, the kind that ended kingdoms or forged new ones. "How many?" Kale's voice was tight as he joined her, Marcus and several other high-ranking wolves following close behind. He was dressed for battle now, leather armor over his chest, weapons strapped to his back and waist. Through the mate bond, Lyra could feel his fury, his protective instinct screaming to get her somewhere safe, but also his respect for her strength, his belief that she could handle what was coming. "At least 3,000, Marcus reported grimly. "Maybe more. They're flying banners from all 5 southern kingdoms. This isn't just one Alpha's vendetta, Your Majesty. This is a coordinated attack. They've united against us. Against me," Lyra corrected quietly. "They're afraid of what the prophecy means, what my power represents. A silver-marked queen with moon priestess abilities threatens the old order, the way things have always been. They'd rather destroy us than face change." "Then they've made a fatal mistake," Kale growled, his hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing. The mate marks on both their skin began to glow softly, responding to their proximity and shared determination. "They think because you're new to your power, because our kingdom is smaller than theirs, that we'll fall easily. They're wrong." Elder Moira emerged from the tower stairwell, moving with surprising speed despite her age. Her milky eyes were wide, her face pale. "The moon showed me this," she said urgently. "I saw it in my vision last night but hoped I was wrong. They've brought witch hunters, Lyra. Humans who've trained specifically to kill magical wolves. They know about your mark, about your power, and they've come prepared with silver chains and moonstone weapons designed to neutralize your magic." Lyra's blood ran cold. Moonstone was rare. a mineral that absorbed lunar magic rather than channeling it. If the enemy had moonstone weapons, her greatest advantage was already compromised. Then we can't rely solely on my power, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. We need strategy. Marcus, how long before they reach our borders? 6 hours, maybe less. The beta responded. They're moving fast, probably hoping to catch us unprepared. But our scouts reported their approach 2 hours ago. We have time to mobilize our forces, but... Your Majesty... He hesitated, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers. We're outnumbered 3-1. Even with your power, even with the king's strength, those odds... We don't need fair odds. Lyra interrupted, her mind racing. Weeks of training with Marcus had taught her more than just combat. He'd taught her military strategy, had made her study famous battles, understand tactics. We need to use the terrain to our advantage. The valley approaches have narrow passes, places where a smaller force can hold off a larger one. And we have something they don't. What's that? One of the other wolves asked skeptically. We're defending our home, Lyra said simply. Every wolf in this kingdom will fight twice as hard because they're protecting their families, their lands, their future. That gives us an advantage no number can overcome. Plus, she turned to Chaol, we have the king and queen bond. Our powers don't just coexist, they amplify each other. The curse broke because we accepted the mate bond together. What if we fight together? What if we combine your alpha dominance with my moon priestess magic? Chaol's golden eyes lit up with understanding. It's never been done before. An alpha king and a moon priestess queen fighting as one. The old stories speak of it as a theoretical ultimate power, but no one's ever tested it in actual combat. Then today we test it, Lyra said with more confidence than she felt. But first, we need to evacuate the civilians. Every wolf who can't fight needs to be moved to the northern caves, the ones beyond the forbidden tunnels. They'll be safe there. I'll organize the evacuation, Marcus said immediately, already moving. We'll have them secured within 2 hours. The next hours were chaos. Lyra had never seen the kingdom mobilize for war, had never witnessed the transformation of peaceful wolves into warriors. The blacksmiths worked frantically to forge weapons. The healers prepared the infirmary for casualties, and every able-bodied wolf donned whatever armor they had and prepared to defend their home. Mothers kissed their children goodbye, not knowing if they'd ever see them again. Elderly wolves volunteered to stay and fight despite their age, refusing to hide while their kingdom burned. Lyra moved through the preparations, offering words of encouragement, helping where she could, and slowly, she saw the change in how the wolves looked at her. The skepticism was gone. After her victory over Sienna, after weeks of proving herself as queen, they believed in her. When she spoke, they listened. When she made decisions, they followed. She was no longer just the Omega who'd gotten lucky with prophecy. She was their queen, and they would fight beside her. As the army assembled on the castle grounds, Chaol pulled Lyra aside into a quiet corner of the courtyard. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. I need you to promise me something, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If things go badly, if we're overwhelmed, I need you to run. Take the northern passage, escape to the Allied territories, and rebuild from there. No, Lyra said firmly, covering his hands with hers. I'm not running anymore, Chaol. Not from danger. Not from responsibility. Not from you. We stand together or we fall together. That's what the mate bond means. That's what love means. Lyra, do you remember what you said to me in the tunnels? She interrupted. You said you'd rather burn in fire with me than freeze alone in darkness. Well, I feel the same way. I choose you, Chaol Blackthorn. Today and every day. In victory or defeat, in life or death. I choose us. Chaol pulled her into a desperate kiss, pouring everything he felt into it. His love, his fear, his pride, his absolute devotion. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. Then let's make sure it's victory, he murmured. Let's show these southern kingdoms what happens when they threaten our pack. They rode out to meet the enemy at the Valley of Stones, a narrow passage between two mountains that was the main southern approach to Blackthorn Castle. Kale had positioned their forces strategically. Archers on the high ground, shield walls at the narrow points, and their strongest fighters ready to reinforce wherever the line might break. It was a good defensive position, but as Lyra saw the enemy army flowing into the valley like a dark tide, she understood just how desperate their situation truly was. The southern kingdoms had sent their best. 5 Alpha Kings rode at the front of the army, each commanding their own faction. Behind them came thousands of wolves, all trained warriors, all hungry for conquest. And mixed among them, Lyra could see the witch hunters Elder Moira had warned about. Humans wearing strange armor that glowed faintly with moonstone dust, carrying silver chains and weapons designed specifically to capture or kill magical beings. "They're not even bothering with diplomacy," Marcus observed from beside her, his hand on his sword hilt. "No envoy, no demands. They came to annihilate us." One of the Southern Alpha Kings stepped forward, his voice amplified by some kind of magic to carry across the battlefield. "Kale Blackthorn, we've come for the Omega Queen, the one who bears the forbidden mark. Surrender her to us and your kingdom can survive. Refuse, and we'll burn everything you've built to ash." "Their mistake," Kyle said coldly, his wolf rising to the surface, making his eyes blaze gold, "was thinking I'd ever surrender my mate to anyone for any reason. Lyra Blackthorn is queen of these territories, blessed by the moon, proven in combat, and any who threaten her will face my wrath." "Then you've chosen extinction," the Southern King replied. "So be it." The battle began with arrows darkening the sky. Lyra raised her hands, calling on her power, and created a barrier of silver light above their forces. The arrows struck it and disintegrated, never reaching their targets. The northern wolves cheered, their confidence growing. But Lyra could feel the strain, could feel the power draining from her faster than expected. Something was wrong. "The moonstone," Elder Moira gasped from behind her, the old woman having insisted on staying despite the danger. "They've woven moonstone dust into their arrows. It's absorbing your magic with every barrier you create. They're trying to exhaust you before the real fighting begins." Lyra gritted her teeth and dropped the barrier, conserving her strength. "Then we do this the old-fashioned way," she said. "Marcus, signal the charge." The armies collided like thunder. Wolf crashed against wolf, claws and teeth and weapons creating a symphony of violence. Kale was a force of nature, his massive black wolf form tearing through enemies with terrifying efficiency. His alpha dominance rolled off him in waves, making weaker wolves submit without even fighting. But the southern kingdoms had brought their own alphas, and they met him head-on. Lyra fought beside him, channeling her power into focused strikes rather than broad displays. Every time an enemy got close, silver light flashed from her hands, burning, stunning, driving them back. But the witch hunters had her targeted. They moved through the chaos with single-minded purpose, their moonstone weapons glowing brighter as they closed in on her position. "Queen behind you," Marcus shouted, appearing suddenly to intercept a witch hunter's silver chain. The beta fought with brutal efficiency, his loyalty to Lyra absolute, despite his initial skepticism. He'd become one of her fiercest protectors. And now he proved it by taking down 2 witch hunters before a third, managed to loop a silver chain around his throat. Lyra reacted on pure instinct. Silver light exploded from her in a wave that sent the witch hunter flying and melted the chain binding Marcus. "Are you okay?" she gasped, helping him to his feet. "Never better, Your Majesty," he wheezed, rubbing his throat. "But we have a problem." "Look." She followed his gaze, and her heart sank. They were being surrounded. The southern armies had pushed through their defensive positions, flanking them on 3 sides. Their forces were being driven back toward the castle, and casualties were mounting. They were losing. "Kyle!" Lyra called through the mate bond, reaching for him with her mind. "We need to try it now. We need to combine our powers like we discussed." She felt his hesitation, his fear that it might hurt her, might draw too much power, but they were out of options. "Together," he agreed through the bond. "Find me. We do this together." Lyra fought her way through the chaos toward where Kale's massive wolf form was surrounded by 3 southern alphas. He was holding his own, but just barely. Blood matted his black fur, and she could feel his exhaustion through the bond. She reached him and placed her hand on his fur, and the moment they connected physically, the mate bond erupted with power. Silver light and golden dominance merged, swirling together like a storm. Kyle shifted back to human form, his hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing as power built between them. The mate marks on their skin blazed so brightly that everyone on the battlefield stopped to stare, wolves from both sides frozen by the sheer magnitude of what they were witnessing. The king and queen bond. Elder Moira's voice somehow carried across the sudden silence. The ultimate power. The reason the southern kingdoms feared them. Watch and witness what happens when true mates fight as one. Lyra and Kale raised their joined hands, and power exploded from them in a wave of silver-gold light. It swept across the battlefield like a tsunami, and everywhere it touched, enemy wolves fell to their knees in submission. Not from pain, not from injury, but from sheer, overwhelming dominance. The combined force of an alpha king and a moon priestess queen was something primal, something that spoke to the very foundation of what it meant to be wolf. Even the southern alpha kings couldn't resist it. One by one, they dropped to their knees, their wolves forcing them to submit to a power greater than anything they'd ever encountered. The witch hunters tried to resist, their moonstone weapons glowing as they absorbed some of the magic. But they were human, not wolf. And the alpha dominance that was part of the power didn't need magic to work. It worked on instinct, on hierarchy, on the ancient laws that governed their kind. They fell too, their weapons clattering to the ground. Silence descended on the battlefield. Thousands of wolves knelt in submission, their heads bowed, their necks exposed in the ultimate sign of surrender. Lyra and Kale stood at the center of it all, still glowing with combined power, their hands clasped tight. "The battle is over," Kale's voice carried with alpha authority. "You came to destroy us because you feared change, feared power you didn't understand. But here's what you need to understand. My queen and I will not be your enemy unless you force us to be. We don't want war. We want peace. We want to build a kingdom where all wolves, regardless of rank or power, have a place. Where omegas aren't hidden. Where strength is measured by character, not birthright. That's the change we represent. That's what you really fear." One of the southern alpha kings, the one who'd spoken before, slowly raised his head. There was awe in his expression, and something that might have been shame. "We were told the prophecy meant the end of our way of life," he said quietly. "That the silver-marked queen would destroy the alpha bloodlines, make us obsolete. We came to eliminate a threat. The only threat was your own fear," Lyra said, her voice carrying despite being softer than Kale's. She released her mate's hand and stepped forward, letting the silver light fade from her skin. "The prophecy spoke of salvation or destruction, and you chose to see only destruction. But look around you. Not one wolf on this battlefield has died at my hand, though I had the power to kill you all. Because I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to protect my pack and build something better for future generations. If that threatens you, then maybe you should ask yourself why." The Southern King stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he bowed his head in true respect. "We were wrong," he said. "I was wrong. Forgive us, Queen Lyra. We came as invaders. We'll leave as witnesses to a new era." One by one, the other Southern Kings echoed his words. Bowing to both Kale and Lyra, the army followed suit, thousands of wolves acknowledging their defeat not through violence, but through understanding. The battle had been won without the slaughter either side had expected. As the southern armies withdrew, swearing new alliances instead of continuing hostilities, as the northern wolves celebrated their impossible victory, Lyra felt the exhaustion finally catch up to her. She swayed, and Kale caught her immediately, sweeping her into his arms. "I've got you," he murmured, carrying her back toward the castle. "You were incredible. You saved us all. We saved us all," Lyra corrected sleepily, her head resting against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Together, like it was always meant to be. The sun was setting over Shadow Peak Kingdom as they returned to Blackthorn Castle, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The crisis had passed. The prophecy had been fulfilled not through destruction, but through demonstration. Proof that the silver-marked queen and her alpha king were stronger together than anyone could have imagined. But as Lyra drifted into exhausted sleep in Chaol's arms, as the kingdom celebrated around them, she knew this wasn't truly the end. It was a beginning. The beginning of a new era, of change spreading through all the territories, of an Omega Queen, proving that strength came in many forms. There would be more challenges, more enemies, more battles to fight, but she was ready now. She had her mate, her power, her kingdom, and most importantly, she had belief in herself. The girl who'd fled into the tunnels to escape her destiny had become the queen who'd defend that destiny with everything she had. And that was a story worth telling, a story that was only just beginning. If this journey of Lyra and Chaol's love, of destiny embraced and power claimed, made your heart race and your soul sing, then you know what to do. Smash that subscribe button, hit that like because we're building something special here at Alpha Destiny Tales, and every one of you helps us get closer to that first 1,000 subscribers. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of this epic tale, and let me know what kind of forbidden romance you want to hear next. Remember, your destiny is out there waiting. Sometimes you have to run from it, to truly understand it's worth claiming. Until next time, stay fierce, stay true, and never stop believing in the power of love.